Hey everyone, welcome back to the last part of my Freqtrade series. I'm going to show you how to deploy a crypto bot to a server using Docker and Linode. So I've documented this entire process on the website at hackingthemarkets.com. And so if you want to check it out there, you can. Otherwise, you can follow along with the video. As I mentioned, we're going to be deploying a Freqtrade to a Linux server. And there's a few benefits to this. You can just run a crypto bot on your laptop. But as you know, you shut your laptop down, you run Photoshop on it, you have all these processes and things running. It's good to have a dedicated server that's always connected to a fast internet connection in a data center that doesn't shut on and off. So the first step to get started is to actually create a Linode server. If you watched my gap trading video that I did, I showed you how to do this with Alpaca before, but I'm going to show you how to use Docker and Freqtrade for this one. Now, you don't have to use Linode. You can use another server provider like DigitalOcean. I know a lot of people like that. I personally had pretty bad luck with it when I ran just a small, cheap server there. I used to run the message board on there, and for some reason it went down fairly frequently, and the WordPress site went down fairly frequently. But with Linode, I've actually been a paying customer since 2009. Never had a problem, so that's the one I use for everything now. So with Linode, you get this nice administrative console for spinning up as many servers as you like. I have 3 servers running in this one already. I'm gonna spin up one just for this tutorial. And so what you can do is you do create, you do Linode right there, and you're going to set up a new server graphically here. And so I'm going to click a Linux distribution. You can choose Debian Linux or Fedora and those, but I'm going to choose Ubuntu 22.04 LTS. Just came out in April, so it's pretty up to date and new. Debian 11 is also a good choice as well. And so for region here, I'm in California, so I'm choosing Fremont, California. But if you're in London, for instance, you could choose London or a data center that is close to you. Under Linode plan here, you can choose a powerful dedicated CPU if you want just a server all to yourself, or you can use a virtual private server here, which is cheaper. And that's what I use for these types of tutorials. And so I'm going to choose the lowest tier. So this is a Nanode. These cost $5 a month. I actually did include an affiliate link up here if you do sign up for Linode, or right there, and you get $100 free. So you could try this out and then cancel this if you don't decide to continue. But if you want to, after some amount of time, eventually you end up having to pay $5 after all your credits are expired. It gives you the option to give your server a label here. So I have a server called Freqtrade server, but I'm going to make a Freqtrade server 2 so that I can distinguish this is the second one I'm creating. You choose a root password. So when you log into your server, you need a root password, or you can use SSH authentication. So you can add an SSH key here. I'm just going to use a password on this one and just set a strong password just like that. And then down here, you can create the Linode. Note, there is a backup service. So for $2 a month, I have 3 different backup slots. And so I have had this running for client applications. Like I've said, I've run Linode for over 10 years, like 13 years now. And so I have some mission critical apps actually running on them that have been running for 13 years actually. And I have backups. And so if something were to happen and I lose that data, I can restore a snapshot of what it looked like on the last backup, or I can manually just click a backup button to back up the entire server. I'm not going to do this one because I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to launch this one and shut it down after this video. So I'm going to click create Linode now. And you see it's confirming Ubuntu 2204 in the Fremont data center. You can see it's provisioning the server. So it's spinning it up right now. And this is actually going to be ready in like a minute or so. And what else? You see some simple stats here. You can get some 16 core or 4 core, whatever size. I forget all the different sizes you can do for CPU, RAM, and storage. If you need more, you can get it. Some people like to say, oh, I have this amazing infrastructure and server, but I find, if you're just running a little trading bot, you don't need this huge server. It might sound cool and you might pay a lot for it, but I don't prematurely optimize anything. I wait till I actually have some scalability issue before I upgrade this. And so Linode and other services let you bump all this stuff dynamically, and you can pay more if you decide you need a lot. So real quick, if you want to see some real stats, if I look at my server that's been running for 3 weeks, that one that's been running Freqtrade and Docker, you see the CPU here has been at 3% the whole time. So there's no challenge going on. There's no reason to have some fancier machine here. And I can go back for the last 30 days. And then here you see when I spun it up June 28th, it's been always at about 3%, not a lot of IO or network usage. So with this, I know my bill is going to be predictably $5 a month. I don't have to worry, like if I'm using AWS or Google Cloud, if there's some crazy spike in bandwidth or something that they're going to charge me for extra bandwidth or something like that. All right, I went back to my Freqtrade server 2 here. You can see it's now running. So I should be able to SSH into this. So there's a few ways to access this machine. I can SSH into it from the terminal, which is what I'm actually going to do here. But if you don't want to use that and you just want to use a web-based terminal, you can do this. You can click Launch Lish Console, and this will let you log into it as well once it's up and running. And so I'm going to go to the console now, and I'm going to type SSH root at, and then this is my IP address. So root at that IP address, and I can SSH into my server. And so if you're running a modern version of Windows that's up to date, you should have SSH built in now. But if you don't, you need to download a PuTTY, and I link to that in the article down here. All right, I've entered my password now. So what do? Let me clear the screen. We have an empty terminal. We are root at localhost. We're on our Linode server. What do we do now? Well, I go back and look at my notes to remind myself what we're doing. So we've already SSH'd into the server. And the next step is to install Docker and Freqtrade. Right now I'm logged in as the root user. It's generally considered a good practice to create a separate user using like the add user command. So I could do add user part-time Larry, just like that, if I want to create a separate user. So I'll do that real quick. So yeah, you could totally walk through this and create a new user, and I can SSH into this other user and then create my directory then. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and just stay as the root user. And so I'm going to make a new directory using the make directory command. And I'm going to make a directory called Freqtrade, and I'm going to change into that directory. And so I'm in an empty directory called Freqtrade. Next thing I need to do is use curl to download the Freqtrade Docker Compose file. And so this already has curl installed on this machine. So if I type curl, you see it says it's installed. It didn't say command not found. So I'm going to paste my command here, and that's going to download the Docker Compose file from the Freqtrade GitHub repository. If I do that and I list this directory, you'll be able to see that I have this Docker Compose file that came directly from Freqtrade. So that's great. So I usually use a VI to edit these, so Vim to edit these, but in this case, I'm going to use nano since not everyone knows the VI commands. And so nano is a bit easier to use. And so let me go ahead and exit this again. Okay, so that's my Docker Compose file, and you see it's in there. And so there's a whole bunch of different commands you need in order to install Docker. So there's this series of commands here. I linked an article from DigitalOcean that lists these commands out as well if you're using DigitalOcean. But this guide is actually very good for showing you how to install Docker and all the latest commands, specifically for Ubuntu 22.04. And so I got those commands over here. You don't type the $, obviously that's meant to be like a command line prompt. So you just need this part. So first you run apt update. So you're updating the machine to the latest. If there's any patches or anything like that, that's going to install them for your operating system. So that's the first thing. Next thing, there are a few commands for installing some dependencies. So I'm going to install those. So apt install this whole line here. So I go back here. Okay, there you go. I'm going to continue. Install all of those. Okay, and then there's a key here. So, and I should add this copy paste functionality they have here to this site. So I need to figure out how to do that. So I'm just going to copy it from a DigitalOcean site. And so that's the next command. And I'm going to run that, which is good. I'm going to copy this command here, run it. Cool. And then I'm going to run apt update. And then that guy. Okay, so that's good. And then finally, so that actually added this repository where I can download a Docker. And so then I copy this and it should actually install Docker. Okay, so that should install Docker, and then it gives me a command to test it. So this is downloading and installing Docker and the Docker Community Edition CLI. And that should be all I need. So apt install Docker Compose is the other one. So make sure I have Docker Compose because we're going to use that next. Okay, so I installed Docker Compose. So I can type the command Docker. You should see the command Docker like that. And if you type Docker Compose, you should have Docker Compose. Okay, so now I have Docker Compose, and I'm in my Freqtrade directory where this Docker Compose YAML file is. I can type Docker Compose pull, and that will pull the Freqtrade image. Just like that, it's downloading the Docker image for Freqtrade, and we're going to bring that up and run it. All right, we've pulled the image down, and then now we can run these couple of commands. Just like we did in the first video when we set it up with Docker locally, we need to create a user directory. So I'll copy this command, create a user directory, and it's just called user data, right? And so this will create a directory inside of this directory called a user data. So if I list this, you see there's a directory called user data. And then I need to create a config file. So it'll generate a configuration file for me. So I'll run that command, and that generates a config file at userdata/config.json. And then this prompts me with a few questions on what I want my configuration to be. I've put all the answers here, and I'm just going to answer them here real quick. Do you want to enable dry run simulated trades? Sure, we will allow that. Insert your state currency. I'm using USDT. Stake amount, $100 is okay for me. Maximum open trades, 3, sounds fine. I'll let the strategy define the time frame. I'll display the currency USD, right? And then we choose an exchange. I know a lot of people out there use Binance. I'm using FTX in this case. Choose your exchange. I'm not enabling Telegram, but I'm going to enable the REST API. Okay, so I'm saying yes there. And it says, this one's important, insert API server listen address, put 0.0.0.0 for Docker. So you need to put that so that you can have your container listing for connections from the outside world, because we're going to be using the Freqtrade UI and setting that up. Okay, so I'm doing 0.0.0.0. I do that. I give a username and password for my web UI. So I'm going to call it part-time bot here. And then I'm going to give it a password, part-time123. It's not going to be here when you see the video, don't worry. Okay, and then there you go. So generates a config JSON file. And so if I go in here and I cd into user data and I list what's in here, you see there's tons of directories for results. There's a database, and there's also a config.json here, and you can see it generates that JSON with all the configuration data that I just entered in. So now that we have all this, we can actually start Freqtrade up. So I can do Docker Compose up-d just like that. And so I'm going to go back out of my user directory. Make sure you're in the same directory that has the Docker Compose YAML file. And I'm going to do Docker Compose up-d like that. And it says creating Freqtrade done. And so that actually ran it in the background. And so if I were to shut down this terminal now, you could still actually see Freqtrade's actually running, right? Even if I disconnect from the server, disconnect from the terminal here. Okay, so it's running in the background. And so to test that, I can type Docker PS here. So Docker PS, type that. You can see that'll list all the processes that are running. So this is showing that Freqtrade is actually running, created 20 seconds ago, and it's actually running, right? And so it's listening on port 8080. And so in that case, shouldn't I be able to access the web at port 8080 and see the Freqtrade UI up and running? So I'll go over here to my Linode console, and you see my IP address for my server is right here. So I should be able to get my IP address in here for my server. And then I'm going to do port 8080 like that. And you'll see the site cannot be reached, which is actually as expected. So this doesn't listen to the outside world by default. So by default, you bring it up, it's in this Docker container, but it's just running on local hosts. And if you go to it remotely, you can't see anything. So the next thing we need to do is we want to fix that. We want to make this accessible from a remote IP address. And so I want to be at home or on the road and access my Freqtrade UI from the web. So to do that, first, remember we brought our container up. We need to do Docker Compose down. Let's bring it down and let's make some changes, right? We're shutting this thing down. So it's going to stop Freqtrade. And then after that, we're going to edit that Docker Compose YAML file and make one change. So if you look down here in this Docker Compose YAML, you see under ports here, by default, if I edit this, Docker compose YAML, so I'm going to edit this. And if I arrow down here to my ports, you see it says 127.0.0.1. That's localhost. What I want to do is delete that and just have the ports 8080, 8080, just like that. And if I do that, it'll actually listen remotely. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to bring the container back up. So I'm going to do docker compose up -d again. So let's bring it back up, and let's see what happens. So should bring it up, and then I'm going to go back to my IP address here. And boom, I refresh. Welcome to the Freqtrade UI. So congratulations, we now have Freqtrade, the Docker container running, and I'm actually on my server here on port 8080, and I'm accessing it from my laptop, which is great. That's just what I wanted. I can click trade here, and now it wants to know my bot name and that username and password I just put in, and I said part-time bot, part-time123, right? So that was my username and password. And did I name the bot as well? No, you just type in whatever name you want here. So part-time bot 1, and I'm going to say part-time bot is my username that I just specified, and part-time bot, part-time123. There you go. So I logged in, and there you go. This thing is running already, and you can see it actually is already looking at some trades here. Did actually enter some trades. So by default, it runs this sample strategy, which is just an overbought, oversold strategy. And it looks like, what do you know, things are already oversold, and so it already entered some positions. Now this is just trading in a dry run mode right now, but we're going to add an API key in a moment where we can trade with real money. But yeah, there you can go. There you go. You can see this thing is already hard at work. The Docker container opened up. We have sample strategy is already configured. So if you were to look at the Docker compose YAML file and scroll down, you can see there's a command in the Docker compose file that it runs when it starts up. So it runs the command trade, and then it gives a log file, SQLite database, a config JSON file, and it passes a strategy, sample strategy. And we're going to substitute that out shortly, right? And so you can see this thing is actually working. If I go to user data here, you see there's a SQLite database. Let me see if I have SQLite 3 installed. Let me install SQLite 3. So I'm going to do apt install SQLite 3. And just to show you what the database looks like, I can type, after that install, SQLite 3 trades v3 SQLite, and I can type .schema, and you see there's actually a database here, and then the tables are called orders and trades. And if I do select star from orders, yeah. So you can see there's data in here already, and there's already 3 buy orders. So I'm gonna do .quit right there, and go back here and go back to my Freqtrade directory. Okay, so this is up and running. It's already trading, which is kind of crazy. So that was pretty easy. Now, one thing here is that you notice I can access it from my laptop, and in fact, I can access that UI from anywhere. And even though it's password protected, which is one layer of protection, you might not want that accessible from anywhere in the world. You know, you might only want it from your home's IP address. And so what I've done here is included some instructions for adding a firewall rule here. And so Linode actually has this firewall rule section here. So if I click firewalls, you can actually create a firewall. And I left the instructions there. I'm not going to walk through the whole thing. I already have one set up here. And so what it does is I can create rules for accessing this server. And what you do here, I can do default inbound policy, and I just need to say drop. So basically I'm saying deny inbound connections from everywhere. And that locks my server down completely. No one can connect to it. And then after I do that, I need to actually add some rules to allow and explicitly whitelist certain IP addresses. And so you can see that I've whitelisted TCP 8080 access, so port 8080 we're accessing it on. I'm saying accept inbound HTTP from this IP address where I was a little bit earlier. And then I also put the port 8080, so custom port 8080. And so I'm going to deny all incoming addresses except for one IP address for this particular port. So I only whitelist where I'm allowing access from. Same thing with SSH. So if you want to still SSH to your server, I wanted to SSH into it from anywhere. So I added another rule, right, that says a source is just all. And I did the preset for SSH, which is port 22, right? So I do that, and then I have a firewall rule, and then I can add Linodes to my firewall rule. So I added my first Freqtrade server to that one, and I can also add my Freqtrade server 2 to that. And then I have one firewall set of rules for all my different servers that I add here, and I can apply them for as many servers as I want. So I've typed out step by step and taken screenshots of what you need to do in order to set up these firewall rules to make your bot access more secure. So once that's done, the next thing we need to do, the final thing, is to actually go live with our strategy. And so here you can see there's that config JSON I talked about. And so when you set up your exchange in your config file, you need to put an API key and API secret that actually corresponds to your account. And so this is my FTX account right here. And if I go to the top right and I click API, you'll see the API section. If you scroll down, there'll be a section for API keys, and you create your API key and secret there. And then you just go over to your config file, right, which is in user data, right? And you can do nano config.json, right? And then where it says exchange down here, you just need to enter your key and secret, and you should have set up the exchange name when you generated the config file. And then you'll be good to go with your exchange setup. Then at the top of my config file, you see where it says dry run true. I can switch it over to, say, a dry run false. Right? We don't want to do simulated trading anymore. We're ready to do real trading. And so that should be good. And I'm going to do a Docker compose down now. And this is going to bring my Docker container back down. And what we're going to do is take an example strategy, or a strategy that's already coded up from the Freqtrade strategy library. We're going to put it on our server, or you can put a strategy that you've hand coded onto your server, and then we're going to bring it back up in live trading mode. So let's go ahead and do that. So my Docker container is now down. I've entered in my API key and secret for my exchange, and I've turned off dry run mode because I feel ready to go. And so I need a strategy. And so now I just need to add a new strategy. I don't want to run sample strategy. Not that there's anything that bad about sample strategy, but I'm going to put up a different strategy. And so on the example Freqtrade strategies here, if you like one of these, or if you have your own, you can get it on GitHub, and then you just download it to the server. So if you have a strategy that's very private, you don't want to share with the world or put on GitHub, you can use a command like scp to copy that file from your machine to the server, or you can use sftp as well. So you can use FTP, or you can git clone from a private repository, or you can be kind of ghetto and just paste it into Nano and just paste it into your terminal, all the code, and that should be fine as well. Or you can actually configure a Visual Studio Code to be able to edit files on the server if you just want to use your actual editor. That's another way to do it. I still need to do a tutorial on VS Code and all these different things you can do with it, so look out for that in the future. What I'm going to do for this one is go to the Freqtrade example strategies. We talked about this reinforced smooth scalp already, right? And what you can do is go to raw here, and then you can just download this file to the server. And so what I did was just use curl here, and then just downloaded this file as I output it as scalp.py, just like that. And if I do this, and I need to do this in my user data strategies directory, do that. And then now you'll see I have this scalp.py right here. And then if I edit that, you can see my scalp.py right here. So it's already set up. And then now what I can do is go to my Docker compose file and edit that again with VI or Nano. And then at the bottom here, where it runs a trade, instead of strategy sample strategy, I can do the name of the class. So the name of the class in this case is a reinforced smooth scalp. So I'm going to do reinforced smooth scalp, just like that. Okay. And then I'm going to save this and close, just like that. And then I'm going to bring my container back up, and I'm going to let it show, I'm going to let it run in the foreground. So I'm not going to do the -d part. I want to see all the logs and things spitting out here. I want to make sure this picked up all the right information. And you can also check the log files as well. And so you can see right there, it says could not get balance due to exchange error. It said invalid API key. So looks like I entered mine wrong. So I went over to my other server that I've been demonstrating in previous videos to remember what I did wrong. And it looks like under ccxt config here, I'm on FTX US. So I had to put hostname FTX US right there. So I'm going to do that in this config as well. So ccxt config hostname ftx.us. You might have to do something like this for Binance as well. I'm not sure. So that's the difference here. Some of these do ftx.com or binance.com by default, and you have to put a host name in here. So with that change, I think we'll be good to go. So I'm going to go back up to my Freqtrade directory. So I bring my container down, and I'm going to try this one more time. Bring my container back up and see if it runs with my new configuration here. So I'm running it, and look at that. It seems like it's doing stuff. So let's see if it got my account balance. And then there you see, yeah, it seems to be going. It says exchange FTX, stake per trade, $100, and then strategy reinforced smooth scalp. And now if I go back, let's see, to my web UI at this IP address, I got my part-time bot. I go to trade, I'm going to click a pair here, and then you see up here it says reinforce smooth scalp strategy. So it's actually running that strategy, right? So there you go. We now have a live crypto trading bot running on a server that we own, and it's running on FTX using my real account now with strategy reinforced smooth scalp. It's running live. It's not a dry run. It's not theoretical. It's not just a notebook and a back test where we're just studying forever and ever. We actually deploy it and make some real trades, and once we see what happens, that's when the real learning happens. Don't just study things forever. Put something live from time to time to make sure you're actually applying what you learned. So thanks a lot everybody for watching, and see you soon. I'll be discussing Jesse Trade pretty soon. It looks like it has support for futures trading, which a lot of people have been asking about. So I'll take a shot at that. I don't normally trade futures, but I'm not afraid to try new things. So thanks a lot for watching. See you next time. Bye.